Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Rousmaniere from Miami University in Ohio, and I'm here with Margaret Haley, who's sort of a prequel to the AFT, and also in the spirit of prequel, she's comes from a place far, far away at Chicago. So her teacher organization is Chicago-based. It's women elementary school-based. It's Irish Catholic-based. And it happens before the AFT is founded, but she is a founding leader, really a founding mother of the American Federation of Teachers. So I want to introduce you to her here. She's happy to be back here, and I'm happy to be here. And I spent a lot of time with her writing this biography, and in your packet there's an article that a colleague and I wrote about her where we describe Haley as a diva citizen leader, the term diva, because she was flamboyant, groundbreaking, rule-breaking, controversial, unwilling to compromise, terrified of none, terrifying to others, disruptive, difficult, and dynamic. And of course, she was also political. And she was a really, really terrific teacher leader in early 20th century Chicago, and she served as a major pain in the rear end of city school administrators and city and state legislators during her time period. But here's the trick is that Margaret Haley was also tragically defeated. And since these days we're seeing our own defeat in some ways all too clearly, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on what Haley won and what she lost, and I want to talk a bit about what I think we can learn from some of what she lost and how we can use some of her losses as a guide for social justice movements in the future. But first, let me introduce you to her. Margaret Haley was born in 1861 in an Irish immigrant family in rural Illinois. She became a country school teacher at age 16, and she later moved to Chicago, where she taught in one of the city's poorest school districts, in the Stockyards district, where the meatpacking factories were. And she taught there for over a dozen years, sixth grade. In 1897, she joined the newly formed Chicago Teachers Federation, and that was an organization that was founded and led by white women, mostly Irish Catholic, elementary school teachers, because elementary and secondary school teachers were very separate at this time, for the purposes of protecting their newly won pension and also for improving working conditions in city schools. And Haley immediately rose to leadership in the Federation, and in 1900 she left the classroom to become the business manager, lobbyist, and administrative leader, and she held that position until her death in 1939. During Haley's tenure, the Federation fought for and gained increased salaries, a stable pension plan, tenure laws, and it led investigations into teachers' working conditions and school funding. In 1903, Haley negotiated an unprecedented affiliation between teachers and the Chicago Federation of Labor. And in 1916, she led the organization to become Local 1 of the AFT. There's a complicated story through the 30s about how Local 1 is now the Chicago Teachers Union, which is not the descendant of the Federation. So there's some complications there, not surprisingly. Nonetheless, she was one of the founding and largest locals of the AFT in 1916. She also worked at the national level. She lobbied the National Education Association to include the representation of women teachers, and she did a lot of groundwork lobbying and speaking to local women and school and teacher groups around the country. And her life as a teacher and an activist centered around what I see as three themes. First theme, unity. Teachers needed to unify in organizations. This is 1897, so remember, women don't have a right to vote, and unions themselves are barely legitimate, barely existing. So she said that teachers needed to unify in organizations, both for their own self-definition as a working group and to seize power to improve their working conditions. And in this, she was temporarily successful. At its height, the Chicago Teachers Federation membership accounted for 2/3 of all the city's teachers, and it secured for those teachers the pension, nominal raises, and improved regulations on teacher transfer policies, tenure, and other policies. Her influence encouraged the rise of what became the powerful St. Paul Teachers Federation, St. Paul, Minnesota Federation, and the Classroom Teachers Organization in the NEA, as well as the AFT. The second theme is social change in a democracy, and she believed that public schools were the generative engine of a democratic society. She was an early critic of what she called factoryization of education. which is what it sounds like, and she fought not only for teachers' rights as workers, but also for their role as reformers and humanitarians in schools. And here she echoed John Dewey's faith that the school can be a potential agent for social change. Under Haley, the Federation became the organizational force of other reform movements for social change, including electoral reform, women's suffrage, municipal ownership of basic utilities, and teachers' participation in state, city, and national politics. And then the third theme, which I think is the most important, is economics. Haley's signature activity in this realm of economics was her famous tax case. In early 1900, Margaret Haley initiated what would become a 5-year-long lawsuit by the Federation of a number of major Chicago corporations that were illegally claiming tax deductions. Because of these deductions, the Federation's charged, 4,000 women teachers were denied a 5 to 10% raise. In order to take on this case, Margaret Haley taught herself city finance and corporate law, and she championed the lawsuit throughout the city and state legislative halls. She also spun the case to represent a larger movement of humble citizens fighting to control corporate greed, promoting the then popular condemnation of tax dodgers as evil, unpatriotic people. Isn't that great? In later battles, Haley challenged the Chicago Board of Education's corrupt leasing of school policies as another way in which behind-the-scenes corporate financing was undercutting community education. And so the core of Haley's strategy here was to make it public that wealthy business interests used the tax code to enhance their own private gain at the expense of the public school. This occurred because businesses intentionally made the economics of education incomprehensible to most citizens. Women teachers especially were woefully ignorant of financial matters, and they were thought to think of their work as a natural female occupation that deserved little pay, and that they were taught to leave economic issues to their fathers and husbands. So the answer to this problem, Haley said, was teacher education in economics. As public civil servants, teachers had the obligation to understand school finance and to teach it to their school communities. So those three themes, unity, social change, and public education and school finance, all good platforms for a good teachers union. But after completing this biography of Margaret Haley, I had to come to an important and uncomfortable moment when I asked myself, if she was so terrific, if these themes were so dynamic and mean so much to us today, why did they fail? Why do so few people know about Margaret Haley, and why are these policies so absent in our current practice? So I have two thoughts on this topic that I hope may be useful. In other words, thoughts about how Haley's strengths and weaknesses, we can learn from them for today's work. My first thought here is about language, rhetoric, and leadership. Haley's opponents 100 years ago were able to do what teachers' opponents today still can do, and that is to rhetorically identify teachers' interests as selfish special interests. For all that Haley's Federation emphasized their role as caring women teachers working for the good of the community, the teachers continued to be pegged as selfish money grubbers. And neither Haley nor any teacher activist since her has been able to persuade the public that what was good for teachers was also good for children. Although I do think that the 2012 Chicago Teachers Union campaign that was entitled "The Schools Chicago Students Deserve" made a step towards maneuvering this rhetorical challenge. On the other hand, Haley herself had her own rhetorical genius. On the stage, she was a great actor in a great part. She played off of her own femininity. She described her own political tactics by twisting Teddy Roosevelt's famous line, "Speak softly and carry a big stick," into her own version of public leadership. "I didn't have a big stick," she said wickedly, "but I had a little one with nails in it." That little stick included mocking, deriding, and undercutting male opponents and using Robert's Rules of Orders to maneuver meetings to her favor. And I'm also particularly fond of her rhetorical portraiture of tax dodgers as oily, reptilian men with fangs and small brains. Now, but the risk of Haley's charismatic mocking strategy was also the alienation of others. And even as Haley created a large fan base, she was also ruthlessly polarizing, and she intentionally rejected alliances with school administrators, secondary teachers, middle-class women, and all African-American activists in schools and out. Leadership is tricky. Leadership by women was and remains very tricky. And the lesson here is that unity can mean, by definition, it can mean the exclusion of others, and that language and image and rhetoric matter. They have and they always will for women. My second and final thought here about Haley's strengths and weaknesses and how we can develop strategies to re-energize and promote her vision is about economics. I think that Margaret Haley's genius was in teaching women teachers that they could and should understand economics. She was certainly not the first to promote this. In fact, Charlotte Perkins Gilman wrote a terrific book called Women in Economics at about this time. But Haley's call for teachers to learn about and teach school communities about school finance is especially important for teachers who, even today, in my teacher education classrooms, are suckered into thinking that teaching is all about individual caring and not about collective society. So, of course, this emphasis on economics, I think, is also the main reason why Haley's vision failed. She organized her civic vision on a significant challenge to capitalist ideology. Although she never embraced a socialist platform for reorganizing the economy, her critique of the tax system attacked the power structure of modern corporate capitalism. Wow, what's going on? Exactly, he was listening to me. And clearly, we've only lost ground on this topic. Today, we're far from the New Deal mentality of the public good. But I do believe that the main thing we may want to take away from Margaret Haley is her ability to create a movement that understood that taxes are needed for the maintenance of a shared public, and also a movement that condemns tax dodgers as people who steal from that shared public. Over the years that I've spent with Margaret Haley, it's this call for economic education that continues to strike me as what I think is her most successful strategy. In my own experience as a professor, and I'm also mayor of the town in which I live, when citizens do learn about public finance, when they begin to understand the way that the government works, why my street is paved and yours is not, why my kid is in a classroom with 40 kids, 40 classmates, and your kid is not. When people begin to understand why that happens, then they begin to understand how they can take charge and get involved in government. So Haley's fight to control knowledge, this knowledge about economics was a tough fight, and this was even in the days before Fox News. In fact, we might think she had it worse back then because early 20th century newspapers were just as decidedly opinionated, and public information was much more tightly controlled. Still, I believe that if we emphasize on this idea of economics in public as Margaret Haley advertised, we can keep moving forward. Thank you.